Commissioner of Administration Jay Dardenne is here. Mr. Jay, welcome back to Kia. Let's start here. 3 weeks, phase one. 3 weeks. How was that number arrived at?
The CDC guidelines suggest a 14-day period to see progress being made, and the governor wanted to make sure we had a little cushion on top of that 14-day period. So we'll be able to look at the 14 days, and that's why the 21 days was selected. An announcement will be made like it was this week. My appreciation is on the Monday of that week before hopefully moving to phase two on Friday, 3 weeks from now.
Go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. The decision for phase one, the governor's decision, was it an easy one? Was it one he agonized over? Did it go back and forth? What was the deciding factor? What were the factors, if any?
I think for him the most difficult decision was the one that was a couple of weeks ago to extend until May 15th. Obviously, we were all hopeful we'd be opening on the 1st, but the numbers just didn't justify that. And we were moving toward this May 15 date all along, hoping that the numbers were going to continue to improve, and they did. And so from that standpoint, it was kind of an expected move, and we were all very hopeful that May 15th was going to be the date, and it turns out that it is.
Jay, I'm reading from the list of businesses to remain closed. Public amusement, carnivals, water parks, trampoline parks, casinos, video poker are on that list. But we understand they are going to be allowed to open up Monday. How was that exception made for those businesses, but others, tattoo parlors, massage parlors, were not given that exception? Describe what happened here with regard to casinos.
Well, I don't know that I can give you a full description of exactly how that happened. There was a lot of discussion with the healthcare folks in terms of how you could make certain that there was going to be social distancing and proper spacing and avoiding immediate contact with people. Obviously, in tattoo parlors and those kind of places, there is some direct contact, and it's difficult to not have the kind of close proximity that you have with barbershops and cosmetology locations, beauty shops. Those were expected to be open, and they are because of social distancing and the ability to wear masks and what have you. The casino, there is going to be an opening of those casinos with a 25% limit, I believe, in place there, as well as social distancing and sanitation and what have you.
It was in my head. I was going to ask you, pardon me, about the Revenue Estimating Committee. And every time I go to say that, I almost say Revenue Enhancement Committee, which would be a lot cooler right now because there's going to be, according to the committee, a big shortfall. What's the first reaction? Yours, the governor's, is what are you talking about?
$1 billion, huh?
Unfortunately, it was expected. We knew it was going to be a severe blow, and it's happening all over the country. It's $1 billion when you combine the remaining couple of months of the current year as well as the new fiscal year that begins July 1. There's not going to be any revenue enhancement from the standpoint of new revenue, new tax. We are going to get some relief from the CARES Act. The state got $1.8 billion from the federal government. We talked about, I think, last time I visited with you. Every state got a significant amount of money. The federal government can print money, and they can go into debt, whereas states like ours can't. So this is an unprecedented, huge amount of money that's come to the state. There are limitations on how it can be used, but there's some fairly liberal guidelines that have been issued by the U.S. Treasury that are going to allow us to tap into a significant portion of the $900 million that's available to the state. There's $800 million for local governments that have incurred expenditures related to the virus, but we're going to be able to use a significant amount of that $900 million in both the current year and next year, as well as the fact that as part of the Families First Act, which Congress also enacted in response to the virus, there was an increase in the percentage that the state will get from the feds for treating Medicaid patients, not the expansion Medicaid patients, but the ones who've been on Medicaid all along. And that's going to be a source of revenue that's going to help us deal with this $1 billion problem. It's going to be a challenge. We're going to have some cuts, but we're going to be able to offset some of those cuts with these two revenue sources.
When we talk about cuts, Jay, we have two areas that have been the only areas we've been able to cut: higher ed and healthcare. Both of those are hugely challenged right now. How do we avoid that? Is there any way lawmakers can lift those restrictions in other areas of the budget?
Well, there's the legislature could do that with 2/3 vote in other areas like the MFP for K-12 education. I don't look for that happening. That's not going to be an alternative, I don't believe, for the legislature. But there are other areas of government that we're going to make cuts, but they're very small compared to where the big general fund dollars are, and that's what we're talking about, general fund dollars, and they're predominantly in health care and higher ed. And those areas are potentially looking at some reductions. We're going to do everything we can to minimize that, particularly in higher ed, where we were hoping to have some plus-ups this year back before the virus when we thought things were going well and we'd be able to do some things we needed to do for higher ed for a long time. But there are going to be some tough decisions lawmakers are going to have to make. And yesterday, I understand the House committee passed some suspension of taxes. If the legislature votes to suspend some taxes in the next year, that's going to make the budget challenge even more difficult. Now, some of those proposals don't go into effect for 2 years, but if there are any tax reductions in the upcoming fiscal year, that's going to mean more cuts are going to have to be made, and the legislature is going to have to decide where those cuts come from, and that's going to be very difficult.
Job losses in state government, Jay, would you anticipate that?
Well, it's possible, but we've avoided any layoffs thus far. The governor was very adamant from the beginning that we didn't want to further contribute to the unemployment problem. We wanted to maintain state workers on the payroll as best we could, but that's something that obviously we're going to have to look at, and it's possible. I hope it's not going to happen. We're not going to look to make that happen as a first option, but everything's going to be on the table as we look at a $1 billion problem balanced against these revenue sources I've talked about that are going to help us quite a bit.
Mr. J, there was some speculation that one of the reasons, maybe the major reason that the governor kept us in stay at home for an additional 2 weeks was that it might endanger federal money coming in. Is there any truth to that? And is it a fair criticism?
No, I don't think there's any truth to it. I don't think it's a fair criticism, but the governor's decision was based upon the recommendation of the health experts upon who he had been relying throughout this crisis, as well as trying to comport with what the president said the opening schedules ought to be. And the governor was trying to make certain that our phase one looked as much like the federal recommendation for phase one as possible, and we had not met that 14-day guideline that the president had issued. So despite some of the criticism, the governor was right in line with what the president had recommended for, particularly for a state like Louisiana that had been hit so hard, was a hot spot early on, had the highest percentage of cases in the country for a period of time there. And we were a little bit, as we've talked about before, we were a little bit ahead of a number of other states in terms of what our pre-phase one looked like. There were a number of businesses that were not closed leading up to phase one that had been closed in a lot of other states.
Enforcing this phase one, these guidelines, you're not sending people out to scope out restaurants and close them down if they're violating. Just egregious violations, I guess, would be of concern?
Yeah, there's not going to be people out there running around looking for everybody that's in violation. We hope that the public's reaction to places will help guide some of that, and we believe the business community recognizes its obligation to take care of its employees and to take care of the general public, and we believe there's going to be significant compliance, just like there has been heretofore. The fire marshal is empowered with the authority to regulate businesses when there's not a pandemic, and he's got that same authority during the pandemic, but we anticipate that there's going to be compliance with these rules, and people recognize it's for everybody's safety and everybody's good to follow the regulations that are in place as we ease back into what we hope is going to be some sense of normalcy in the not-too-distant future.